Before I start the message this morning, a couple of things. One, I was reminded Monday morning, John reminded me as soon as I walked in the office of a statement I made in the sermon last Sunday. I was talking about, so we already that, you know what I'm going to say. Talking about how, in the Micah passage we read, it was a court case, and the people of Israel were standing before God, and I said, if you're standing before God, you just need to know you're not going to win. If you're against Him, if you're going up against Him, and I said, kind of like when you play Alabama, you know you're not going to win. And then Alabama went out and just got humiliated. So if you, we do not promote gambling here, but if any of you took what I said last Sunday and you went and made a big wager on Alabama winning that game, I apologize. I tell you, I am not a prophet or a son of a prophet. And if you wagered a lot on that money, you might have called me something else. So again, I just apologize for that. Also, the little kid, the 6th grade and below, if you are doing Grant's group, make sure to get those filled out. Zach will have a new sheet today because we took from last week and we put those together. And next Sunday after worship service, those that have been doing those sheets, if you've turned in close to 10 of them, we will have a pizza party. And it's kind of scary to say that you're giving kids pizza and Cokes when your doctor is in the room, and as kind of told you should lay off of those things. So we're going to have pizza and Cokes next week for those that have done those Grants group. If you don't have one, make sure to grab one. You can run out and grab one right now. Just an opportunity for our little ones to be able to have something to kind of focus them as I talk on Sunday morning. If you've got a Bible, I'm going to ask you to turn to Micah chapter 6. We'll pick up in verse 9. As you're turning there, I want to tell you a story because we're going to talk today about something that for most of us, because we come from a Western culture, a Western mindset, the idea of corporate sin or national sin really doesn't resonate with us. Because we are so individually minded. We just have this mentality, this philosophy that I am on my own. And I am responsible for myself. I'm not responsible for what other people do. And what our nation does doesn't necessarily make me guilty. We don't kind of buy into that. But the culture in which the Bible was written, the Jewish culture, it is more Eastern in its mindset. And it does have this collective mentality. There is this understanding of the corporate nature of who we are. Well, I'll tell you a story to help you to understand that, yes, we can be considered guilty for what other people do. When I was in college, I've told y'all many times, I was part of a group called the Parsons Mounted Cavalry. If you watched the Rose Bowl parade this year, you might have caught about 30 seconds of the Cav riding in the Rose Bowl parade. I will tell you, it's kind of sad. It took them a whole lot of time to get 30 seconds on TV. And a lot of effort went into that. Well, the time that I was in college at A&M, my sophomore year, sophomores in the Cav did all the work. They cleaned all the tack, fed the horse. We didn't feed the horses, juniors fed the horses, but we cleaned all the stalls. We did all the work. And then your junior year is when you actually got to start riding. The sophomores were the ones that walked behind all the horses with the shovels and the wheelbarrows, and you kind of know what we had to do. Well, end of my sophomore year came, and I was appointed in my regular outfit, a position that I kind of need to be involved more with the outfit during the first part of my junior year. And so I kind of withdrew from the Cav at the beginning of the year going into my junior year in college. But what happened at the same time was the Cav got in some major trouble for hazing. And I will just say, they were guilty of most of it. Some of the stuff they got accused of, they weren't guilty of. But they were accused, and they were guilty of most of the things that were being accused of them. Well, because I had been in a Cav, I had earned the right to wear the cord, the designation that I was a member of the Cav. Everybody on campus knew what that yellow cord hanging around my shoulder meant. And because of all the reports that went into the newspaper, the school newspaper, about what had happened, everybody in the cab would look down on it. And people kind of almost despised the cab. And everywhere I would walk, you would see people would look at you. And I just wanted to go, I was not involved. I was not there when those things happened. I wasn't in it. I didn't do it. But people would look and say, he's guilty. Man, he hates women. He's a bad guy because he was in the cab. At the end of the first semester, I got back into the cab and started being a part of it again. Part of the reason was they had been in trouble, and they kind of needed a good guy that they could put out front. And so my buddies talked to me and said, Grant, man, come back. Well, in coming back into the cab, I had to go through a long series of interviews with military officers. And all the way through that, I felt like I was being accused, that I was the one that was guilty. And I'm thinking, I didn't have anything to do with any of the stuff that happened. Well, why are you saying that I am guilty? Well, I was guilty because I wore that cord. Because people associated me with the cab. And yes, reality is we can and will be judged based on who we affiliate with. Let me read Micah chapter 6, starting in verse 9. Here's what God says to the people of Israel. Listen, the Lord is calling to the city, and to fear your name is wisdom. Heed the rod and the one who appointed it. Am I still to forget your ill-gotten treasures, your wicked house, and the short ephah which is accursed? Shall I acquit someone with dishonest scales, with a bag of false weights? Your rich people are violent. Your inhabitants are liars, and their tongues speak deceitfully. Therefore I have begun to destroy you, to ruin you because of your sins. You will eat food, but not be satisfied. Your stomach will still be empty. You will store up, but save nothing. Because what you save I will give to the sword. You will plant, but not harvest. You will press olives, but not use the oil. You will crush grapes, but not drink the wine. You have observed the statutes of Omri, and all the practices of Ahab's house. You have followed their traditions. Therefore I will give you over to ruin, and your people to derision. You will bear the scorn of the nations. You know, there are people that were listening to this that I am sure were going, well, wait, Micah. I'm not in leadership. I'm not one of those people. I'm not a businessman with dishonest skill. I'm not part of any of that. But Micah says, you, the collective you, are guilty. We have this problem, national sin. I want us to think today about our own nation. As we look back and we think about some of these things that Micah says about the people of Jerusalem and Judah and the nation of Israel, I want us to also to look at our own nation and to think about our own nation, to ask ourselves, are we guilty of some of these same sins in our nation? He starts it out, and basically Micah kind of follows with Abraham in the book of Genesis, when Abraham is kind of negotiating with God in prayer and saying, God, if you find 50 good men in Sodom, you won't destroy it, right? And God says, no, I won't. He gets down to 10, and it's like Abraham goes, at least surely there'll be 10 good people in Sodom, right? Come on, God, at least there'll be 10 good people. So if there's 10, you won't destroy it. Well, Micah asks a question in a language reminiscent of Abraham in Genesis 18. He says, can even one good man be found in the nation? Now that is a little bit of hyperbole. Micah has spoken of the faithful remnant. And so Micah knows that there's at least one good person found that can be found in the nation. But he's speaking in hyperbole, and he says, can even one, Is there any good that can be found in the nation of Judah? Is there anything good that is happening? What he's saying is that the nation was so full of wickedness that finding good was a challenge. If you watch the news, you would think about our nation and say, is there any good that can be found in our nation? If you get on Facebook, if you get on the Sanger speaker, sometimes you read the speaker for a little bit and you go, is there anything good in Sanger? Is there anything good that happens in this town? And it's easy to begin to see the bad and the evil all around us and to get so caught up in all of the evil to say, there's no hope, there's no good. And Micah has got to that point where he is depressed and he is saying, God, is there any good? And then he goes into a list of the evils of the nation. He talks about just how bad is it in the nation. And he starts off with economic sins. And he talks about the measures, the weights, the dishonest weights and short measures. And what he's really speaking about is that when you would go to buy grain at a grain merchant's, they would have a deal that ephah is about 6 gallons. And so if you would go to buy an ephah of grain, they would have their little bucket that was supposed to be an ephah. Well, what Micah is saying is what they would do is that they would have one bucket that they would use when they were selling grain to you. And it would not quite be a full ephah. And so instead of getting a full 6 gallons, you might get 5 gallons. But then when they would buy from their farmers, they would have another one. And so when they would buy their grain, they would use another one that was a little bit bigger. And so instead of buying 6 gallons, they would be buying 7 gallons. And so they were ripping off the farmers that they were buying from, and then they're ripping off the consumers who were buying from them. They are stealing in both ways. Economic sins. They're still around. We read so often of scandals within our economy. And I will say to you, if you are a merchant, be honest. There is nothing wrong with making a profit. The capitalist system is built on the profit motive. And there is nothing evil about wanting to make a profit. What is evil is when you try and work to make that profit dishonestly. When you say to somebody, I'm selling you 5 gallons, but yet you're only selling them 4.5 gallons. Or if you tell them, this cost me $100 to produce, and so I'm going to sell it to you for $125. There's nothing wrong with making a $25 profit. That's what you're in business for. But it's when it takes you $50 to make the item, and you tell the person you're selling it to, it cost me $100, so I'm going to sell it to you for $125. Hey, if you can get the person to buy something for $120 or $125 that it cost you $50, wonderful. The problem is when you're telling them, this is what it cost me, and you begin to lie to them. I had a friend of mine whose father had been very successful in business and became a believer. And he told me one time that his dad said to him, son, it's okay, it's great that you're a Christian. Just don't let your Christianity impede on your business. And he came and he asked me about that. He goes, because he was a new believer, he's like, Grant, that's not right, is it? And I said, I am sure glad you don't think it's right. I said, because no, I said, Brad, your faith should impact your business. Yes, you want to make a profit. It's a great thing. I like it as your pastor. I like it when you make a profit. Because when you make a profit, you give more to the church. I kind of like that. That kind of helps me. I can get a paycheck. I said, I like that. There's nothing wrong with making a profit. But it's when you cheat those that you're selling to. But it's also when you cheat your workers. person does a good job for you, they deserve a fair paycheck. We should reward those who work in our companies. The economic sins of the people of Jerusalem, the nation of Judah, were condemned by Micah. Then he goes on, and you might say he starts meddling, because he starts talking about lying. He starts talking about lies, and he gives the picture that lies were just the common fabric of the society. That the leaders lied, everybody lies, and so since everybody lies, it's okay, just go ahead and lie. You couldn't trust what anyone said. Folks, we need to be the kind of people that when we say something, people would say, I'll trust that, I'll believe that. I'll never forget many times going to Sears when my dad worked for Sears. We'd walk in and my dad would be working and he would be selling parts, and you would see this line. And many times you see this line, and there would be Dad working like crazy, and there's two other salesmen over there just twiddling their thumbs. And sometimes I would think, man, why don't you guys go do something and watch? What it was, there were people that had come to my dad for years that trusted him. And I would see them walk up, and they would hand my dad the keys to the car, and they would say, yeah, something's wrong with it. I don't know what it is. Get it fixed. And then you would see they would come back later, and Daddy would try to start telling them everything that had been wrong, everything that they had fixed. And they would just kind of be like, stop. You knew what they'd be fixed. You got it fixed, done. They would sign. And sometimes I would think, man, you guys are crazy. My dad could have charged them for all kinds of stuff. He could have charged them for putting blinker fluid in. But they never worried about it. Because they knew that my dad was a man of honesty, a man of integrity. And if he said something needed to be fixed, it needed to be fixed. Because that's the way we need to live our lives. That when we say to people, this is the truth, they ought to be able just to say, okay, I accept it. I'll believe you. Because your life has been lived in such a way that I can trust what you say. The people of Judah, the people of Jerusalem, lied so often that you couldn't trust anything. We must quit participating in the culture of lies. And that goes to everything we do. I'm going to hit Facebook again. Folks, it is so easy to see that picture come across, that story come across, that looks like, man, it just hits the other side of the political spectrum so perfectly. And to hit share before you actually read the article and before you make sure that what this article is saying is the truth. Don't participate in the culture of lies. Live and operate in such a way that when you say something, people will just simply say, that's the truth. I can trust it. Micah then continues on and he talks about violence. And he says that violence flourished. By the end of 2018, over 2,000 people in the city of Chicago had been hit by gunfire. Folks, that's not Mosul, Iraq. That's not Afghanistan. That is Chicago, Illinois. School shootings have become so common that they almost don't make headlines anymore. If you're a student in Sanger, a parent of a student in Sanger, you probably have gotten over this past couple of years a number of times where an email would come to parents saying that there had been some threat made and that they were taking precautions. And the violence in our society is outrageous. But there is a violence that we don't talk about. But there is a violence that borders on genocide. It's the violence of abortion. As a society, We are killing thousands and tens of thousands of babies every single year. You do that in any other way, and it would be labeled genocide. But yet we continue, and we have made it legal. We have made a culture that celebrates it. I saw on the web just the other day a video. This came from Seattle. A lady that had had an abortion did interviews and like these one-on-one interviews with kids, young kids, talking to them about having an abortion, talking to them about how this was such a great thing for her. That she had gotten pregnant, her and her, I can't remember if it was her husband or boyfriend, she'd gotten pregnant, and it just wasn't the right time for them. And so they went ahead and killed the baby in her womb. Folks, we live in a culture of violence. Domestic abuse, the spiraling abuse of children is going up. And we sometimes wonder why all these things happen, why all of this violence happens. Well, I'm going to tell you, I think it's partly because we say, well, you know, you can kill that baby before it's born. Why not? Why shouldn't you be able to beat it after it's born? We have desensitized ourselves to violence. The people of Israel were violent. The rich men, Micah says that the rich men, they got rich by using violence, threats, intimidation. It was how they made their wealth, and it was also how they kept others from achieving economic success. We in the U.S. live a culture of violence. We must not participate in our culture. We need to stand against that culture of violence. We need to be known as people of honesty, people of integrity, people of compassion, people that do the right thing for the right reasons. But folks, we live in a nation. Because we live in this nation, we are just as guilty of the sins of our nation. And there are consequences. We might not like to think that there are consequences, but there are. There are consequences for national sin. The first one that Micah talks about is rampant illness. God warned that the people would become sick, that there would be a day when a widespread illness would overtake the nation. I might say it was a natural consequence of sin. This past year, I went to the school. The school was going to hold a special group was coming in. They were going to be talking about sexual health. And I wanted to hear what they were going to be telling the students, so I went to the presentation. And in the presentation, they talked about it, and I love it because it was an abstinence-based program. They emphasized that there is one foolproof method to not get pregnant. That there was one foolproof method to not catch a sexually transmitted disease. Anybody know what that is? Don't engage in sexual activity. It's pretty simple. But what they said was widespread illness. The estimate is that 1 in 4 teenagers has a sexually transmitted disease. Think about that. 1 in 4. Now, some of those are minor, but there are some that are very far from minor. 1 in 4 teens. I would call that widespread illness. It's a consequence of sin. Micah also talks about the idea of the lack of food, that there would be no plenty, and then he talks about the food stores would be depleted. In verse 14, he says there would be food, but there would never be enough to satisfy. As I thought about that, I at first immediately thought, okay, what he's talking about is that you'll be able to eat enough to sustain yourself. You'll be able to eat enough to go on with life, but that they would never be able to eat enough. They would not have enough food that they'd be able to eat enough to be able to sit like we do the day after we eat Thanksgiving, right? And go, oh, stuff. Well, that's got to be it. Then as I thought about it some more, God said, Grant, that's not it. It's not about whether they have enough to stuff themselves, because the reality is the rich people, they had enough to stuff themselves. So Grant, what Mike is talking about is that they could eat all they wanted, but they'd always want more. You see, folks, in every one of us, there is a hole in our heart. There's a hole in our life. And that hole is shaped in such a way that the only way that it can be filled is with Jesus. And you can stuff yourself with all of the food you want. You can have 5-star gourmet meals, all the food you want, every single meal. You can have all of the luxuries that are around us. But if you try to fill that craving that is within each and every one of us with anything other than God, it'll never work. No matter how much money you have, you'll always want some more. No matter how good and how high quantity of food you have, you'll always want more. Whatever it is that you try to satisfy yourself with, you're always going to want more. The only thing that can bring true satisfaction is by giving our lives to God and craving Him more and more. He says the food stores will be depleted. You may go, Grant, that doesn't happen to us. The food stores are not depleted. No, they're not. Now, you can go to the grocery store and there's going to be shelves lined up with food. Folks, if we live our life based on how much food I can get, we're always going to have that craving. The consequence of national sin, of forgetting God as a nation, is that we will always crave more, and more, and more. The only way to truly be satisfied is to turn ourselves to God and to crave Him and to find our satisfaction in Him. And He ends this with a sad fact. Destruction will come. Micah foretells of a day when the city of Jerusalem will be destroyed. We don't like to think about our nation and think that there might come a day when it will be destroyed. We have the most powerful army in the world. Right now, there is no nation that could come in and attack us openly and destroy us. But folks, if we don't turn to God, if we don't wipe out a culture of lies, a culture of violence, a culture of economic sins, if we don't turn from those things and turn to Christ, our nation will face consequences. Unfortunately, our nation will destroy itself from within. When I was growing up, in my younger years, the Cold War, and the fear was always that the Russians were going to launch nuclear bombs at us. I'll never forget what I thought was so crazy. They would say, we're going to do a bomb drill, a nuclear bomb drill. And we went out in the hallway and got down on our knees and put our hands over our head. And I always thought, if they drop a bomb, is this going to do anything? It wouldn't. Eventually, the Soviet Union disintegrated. We thought we were home free. And while there is no nation right now that can come in and destroy us, the reality is this: we could do it to ourselves. Micah doesn't leave us with a whole lot of hope here in chapter 6. I mean, he ends with, therefore I will give you over to ruin and your people to derision. You will bear the scorn of the nations. I'm sure glad that not only does Micah not in there, but the Bible doesn't in there. You see, there's hope for us. There's hope for our nation. There is hope for the city of Salem. And that hope is the same for all. Our hope is Jesus Christ. Our hope is for you and I to turn our lives to Him and to live in such a way that we promote honesty, we promote integrity, we promote compassion. But folks, we as the people of God, we need to live our lives not so that we can earn God's love, because we can't. We have been given God's love. But we need to live in such a way as to share that with others. We need to live our lives in such a way that the people will know that when I talk to that person, I know I'm getting truth. You know, that if I need something, those are the people that will stand beside me and help. But for us to be that kind of person, we've got to turn our life to Jesus Christ. Let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, Lord, there is only one hope for our nation, and that is the hope that is found in Jesus. And Father, as I stand here today, I know that the vast majority of the people in this room have confessed you as their Lord and Savior. But Father, I also know that sometimes we let ourselves slip, and that we slip into temptation. Father, I know that we don't always live as we should. Lord, I know there are times that we're tempted to cheat a neighbor, or to cheat a customer, or to cheat our boss. Father, there's times that